This Sunday on Capital Connection, power struggle. ComEd and Exelon come back to Springfield seeking more taxpayer funding for nuclear power, while the Pritzker administration starts the timer for the end of coal and natural gas.
Coal is kind of already on its way out.
Plus, could construction jobs be on the chopping block? The governor celebrated tax breaks in the Blue Collar Jobs Act in 2019, but now plans to phase them out. Senate Republican Don DeWitt joins us to explain the impact.
If you give your word to something, typically people take that to the bank.
And battling systemic racism in healthcare. House Democrat Camille Lilly explains how a new law aims to curb addiction, violence, and infant mortality.
Basic principles and rights have been violated.
It's all coming up on Capital Connection.
From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol Bureau Chief Mark Maxwell is asking the tough questions. This is Capital Connection.
Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell reporting from the Illinois State House on this Sunday, May 2nd. More than a year ago, Governor Pritzker set out to change the state's energy policy. Heading into 2020, his second full year in office, the governor had his sights set on that last big remaining piece of his agenda that had not yet been accomplished. Aside from the progressive income tax, focusing on battling climate change and changing the state's energy outlook was his top agenda item. Then the coronavirus came and visited a world of hurt on Illinois and our country and the globe itself. But now it's back to the drawing board as a number of different power companies are again coming to Springfield looking for taxpayer support or a boost in their industry. But let's revisit where the governor started. We knew there was ComEd corruption going on. We've now learned much more since then. But back then, we wanted to ask him to evaluate the Future Energy Jobs Act the Rauner administration and House and Senate Democrats enacted back in 2016. Before he took office, was that fair then? Critics called it a taxpayer bailout. And would he repeat some of those same things again? Here's what the governor said a year ago in January of 2020.
Really important, and there's much to do. There's going to be energy legislation, no doubt, that we're going to work on in the spring session, and that's going to help us bring more wind and solar to the state. Well, no, I don't support a bailout of ComEd. What I know is true is that we have to look at all the energy sources in the state. We have nuclear, it's significant in this state that we've got to take into account, and of course that's owned by Exelon.
Joining us now is Deputy Governor Christian Mitchell, who is overseeing and heading up the Pritzker administration's effort to negotiate with the House and Senate as a number of competing energy bills are floating around and swirling through the State House here. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
I see in this piece of, well, is it a piece of legislation or proposal?
It will be a bill introduced on Thursday.
I see. So the Pritzker administration now has their own idea that it's sort of taking a number of different proposals and kind of putting them together, trying to find that compromise before the end of session.
Correct.
At the end of May here. It does look like there is still some taxpayer support for ComEd and Exelon for the nuclear fleet in this proposal. Why should taxpayers give Exelon or ComEd another dime?
Well, look, here's the choice that we have in front of us. Nuclear represents about 54% of our power and some massive majority of our clean power. What we want to make sure of, because we know Illinois voters and taxpayers care about this, do we have clean air to breathe? Do we have clean water to drink? If so, zero emission power is going to be important to bridge us into a renewable energy future. So the governor commissioned an independent audit by Synapse Energy Economics to figure out exactly what is it that Exelon would need to keep this fleet alive at the lowest possible cost to the ratepayers. And that is what is recommended in this bill. How do we keep them for the next decade in operation to avoid more dirty power going into the air, but at the lowest possible cost to the ratepayers so that we preserve the resources we need to invest in renewable energy and the green jobs of the future and putting 1 million new electric vehicles on the road by 2030, which is going to create tens of thousands of jobs in the state of Illinois.
I'm going to get to some of the other parts in a minute. I think the proposal that you've laid forward would phase out coal by 2030, natural gas by 2045. I want to get to what exactly that means in a minute, but we're talking about nuclear here, which is, as you suggested, there's no emission, there's no carbon emission there, and it does supply a lot of energy. It'd be hard to replace the whole nuclear fleet all at once. For years, companies like Exelon would come to Illinois and say, not so much that we're broke, but we're not very profitable, so you've got to keep us alive, send us some support. So you've sent auditors in, and you're confident now that they were telling the truth?
We are confident that they're telling the truth, that there is some need. What we're not confident about relative to what they've said to other folks and what has been proposed in other bills is how much support they need. If you go back a couple years to FEJA, there wasn't the same kind of independent, deep examination of what the needs were. And so what we've said is, here's the minimum level of support they need based on our independent audit, as opposed to Exelon coming to us and saying, hey, just trust us.
So how much do they need?
This would be roughly about $70 million a year for the next 5 years. Actually, and that number would probably come down if we're successful in implementing a carbon price, which would further advantage clean emissions in the market.
All right, so does it mean when we look at phasing out coal by 2030 and phasing out natural gas by 2045, does that mean ending the industry or just bringing their carbon emission total down to zero?
It would likely mean that in both cases we'd no longer be building that kind of new generation. The EPA would have authority to extend if there were issues with reliability. But basically, based on announced closures, coal is kind of already on its way out. And so the question is, what do we do to responsibly transition our energy? But also, what do we do to make sure we're helping those communities where those plants are a source of really good jobs and a source of property tax payments for local schools? We propose in this bill using some of the money from carbon revenue to help those communities transition, get into the new jobs of the future while also supporting local economies.
But you mentioned coal already on the way out. That may not already arrive on its own by 2030. But the natural gas thing I think is harder because they're nowhere near on the way out, right? Natural gas is still a very big part of the energy pie in Illinois, is it not?
It is, but that's why, again, we think of, sort of in some ways natural gas and what we're doing to help preserve the nuclear fleet for a while as a bridge to getting us to more renewable energy. So we ramp up to 40% by 2030 based on doubling our investment in renewable energy in this bill. It's an all of the above strategy that says we've got to keep these things online until we get to a place where we're no longer emitting carbon and warming the earth.
If you listen to the natural gas folks, they'll tell you that they don't plan to go anywhere. They hope to be here and that they can produce this natural gas and capture emission and convert it some way through innovation or through science and basically reduce the overall emission or the carbon footprint that they're creating.
Well, they might reduce their carbon footprint, but what they're actually releasing is methane, which is significantly more toxic and actually captures heat at a much higher rate than carbon. So the danger of them when they don't do it well is much higher. And the other thing we do in this bill is end their rider, which says they just automatically get to charge customers to put more pipes in the ground, because a study by PERG showed they're doing that. They're getting a lot of money. They're making as much money as Fortune 100 companies, but they're not actually making us any safer. So you got something that is even more dangerous to the environment, that isn't necessarily making us safer. We understand it's got to be a bridge fuel, but we don't want to invest more resources in it given those externalities for the people of Illinois.
And you may be talking about burned methane. There is unburned methane, which is actually more dangerous and traps more heat in the atmosphere. That is leaking right now from the state's largest underground natural gas storage facility. The state of Illinois permits this place to stay open. There are several different regulatory agencies that oversee this place. If the Pritzker administration were serious on combating climate change and on protecting the environment, would its position be hands off, allow this gas field to just keep leaking?
I don't know that it's hands off. I think the issue always is on environmental regulations. What can we do to beef them up? How much authority do we have in the current EPA Act, for example? We're working right now, and I think you'll see this in a couple of weeks, with environmental advocates to strengthen what we can do under the EPA Act and make sure that we frankly have more teeth to do more enforcement. But the Pritzker administration is pretty serious about the environment. It's why we propose things in this bill that are going to bring down carbon and allow us to do more to stop polluters.
One of the inspectors who worked in the Illinois Department of Natural Resources for several years felt that DNR and EPA had significant power to fine, to cite, and that the Illinois Commerce Commission had the power to ultimately revoke the permit that allowed that gas field to exist if they had to, if it came to that. He felt that the state has a lot of this power, but that they just don't flex those muscles, that they don't actually regulate.
Sure. Look, we've got a new EPA, right? We came in after many years to a hollowed out version of the agency. We've got a director who's very serious about it and committed to enforcement. I think you're going to continue to see increasing regulatory action from our administration on issues like this one.
One other expert in this field in the environmental lane suggested that some of these regulatory agencies are experts in their limitations, but amateurs in enforcing the rules here. Is there room to be more aggressive when you see known pollution happening, leaks happening at places that were permitted by the state? What can the administration do now to say, okay, we've got to either curb this, stop this? Why isn't there a more immediate action? Sure.
Look, I think you can find people, and in very extraordinary cases, you can actually go in and close down operations, but that is often not necessarily successful, leads to additional litigation, which again is why you're going to see what we're saying is, look, we're going to go to the limits of our authority on what we can do. But beyond that, we've got to upgrade our authority. We've got to get to be a more modern EPA, be more like model statutes like Massachusetts. You're going to see us propose some of those things in the coming days.
Very interesting. And before we let you go, I know a lot of people that watch this are interested in wind and solar and what that means for the future of our energy. A lot of it relies on innovation and science and the creation of batteries that can actually hold and retain that kind of power. Is there anything in this, I haven't had a chance to scan through all the hundreds of pages just yet, but is there anything in here that would help innovate the technology that can actually harness the wind and solar power to keep it on the grid longer? Because we know those energy sources expire pretty quickly if you don't spend the energy.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's the right question. And in this bill, we would contemplate the ability for the ICC to begin open a proceeding on how to properly compensate energy storage. Because what you hear from the industry is right now, we don't have much incentive economically to do a lot on energy storage. So what we didn't want to do is prescribe something in the bill that is narrow and based on the technology now, as opposed to giving more broad-based authority to compensate energy storage in the future. So we do contemplate that in the bill, and I think it's very important.
Yeah, how big is our battery collectively, or energy storage? It should be interesting. Deputy Governor Christian Mitchell joining us with a bit of a preview. There's going to be a lot of heated negotiations in the weeks to come as several of these different industries come forward and make their case about why they should have more state funding or support in the future. But thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we're back in just a moment with Senate Republican Don DeWitt. That's next.